It's time for episode 108 of The Crisis Show here on Google Hangouts, on YouTube, on Twitter, Facebook, and wherever else you have this link around the world. Good evening from New York. My name is Rich Klein. I'm president of Rich Klein Crisis Management and founder and host of The Crisis Show, now in its fourth year. Today, in this abbreviated episode of The Crisis Show, I want to talk to you, to the business executives out there, to the leaders out there who may have to testify before a government agency. The hook for the show is yesterday's testimony by the CEO of Planned Parenthood before the United States Congress. Now, the tips I'm about to give you, and I'm going to give you a bunch of them, the tips I'm about to give you apply whether you're testifying before Congress or a state or regional agency, and even a local government. Now, I live most of the time in the Catskill Mountains in upstate New York, where I am today, and throughout the county, throughout upstate New York, there are many local governments. So, for example, if you're a real estate developer and you're trying to get a project approved, you have to get through these town boards, the planning boards, zoning boards, whatever they're called. Sometimes you have to get through all of them to get your project approved. So if you're in real estate, this is really good for you. But let's talk a little bit about the things you have to think about before you even get in that hot seat of testifying before any government agency. The first thing you have to do is assess your company or your organization, depending on the situation. You have to assess your reputation. Are you in crisis mode like Planned Parenthood is these days? Are you in crisis mode like Volkswagen and Fiat are today? It's September 30th, 2015, and these companies are also under attack for good reason, and they will, their leaders will at some point be called to testify as government agencies globally investigate what went wrong in those situations. Just like last year when Mary Barra of General Motors was in the hot seat regularly on the faulty ignition switch issue. So if you're in business, if you lead a high-profile nonprofit organization, at some point, your job is to testify before government agencies, and your job for your stakeholders is to defend your reputation. Now, that doesn't mean lying. It doesn't mean spinning a story. It means that once you have done your due diligence, once you have all your facts, and once you believe that your organization is in a strong position to defend itself, then you are ready for the public persona, for the communications component. And so when you go to testify, there are a lot of things you have to think about. The first thing, again, is assess whether you're in crisis mode or not. But even if you're not, you have to remember that politicians, and especially in the United States Congress, they're going to use the opportunity of these hearings, of this testimony you're going to give. They're going to use this opportunity to attack you, to grandstand, to score political points, to win over voters back home. Many of them don't get media attention except when the camera's on them at these hearings, and they could get their 15 minutes of fame, if you will, to attack you. So assume it's going to happen whether you're in crisis mode or not. But whether you're in crisis mode or not, it doesn't matter. You have to think about the kinds of questions that you're going to be asked. Now, in the case of Planned Parenthood, they knew long ago the kinds of questions they were going to be asked before the CEO testified yesterday and tried to defend her organization. The issues have been in the news ad nauseum for months. Now, your issue may or may not have been in the news, but if it is, very often the head of that committee, for example, the head of a congressional committee doing an investigation, they often do pre-interviews. And we see this a lot on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News here in the States, where they'll go on national television and signal or reveal their cards, if you will, about the kinds of questions they're going to ask you. So it's not rocket science to try to figure out, oh, what are they going to ask me and how am I going to respond? They've already told you in many cases. And if they haven't, then it's your job to try to find out. If you have allies on a local government board or a state agency or Congress, you want to find out who those people are and get some meetings with their staffers to see if they can support you during your day of testimony. But you also need to do your due diligence on your adversaries and find out what their agenda is and how they may come after you on that hot seat and beyond. So it's really important to look at both sides, assess who your friends and enemies are, and then begin to create your written testimony. Now, when you are writing testimony, or let's call them prepared remarks or your statement, doesn't matter what we call them, it's the same thing. You want to write for the eyes and the ears. And it's very important that you think about this when preparing testimony. Some people are going to go online and find your, and as they should, find your written testimony on your website and on your social media, and they're going to read it and try to digest it that way. Other people are going to watch your testimony either live on C-SPAN or local cable network, or they're going to watch the YouTube video. This is inevitable. People record government hearings, they record government business today. You're going to be most likely recorded, and you should record it yourself, by the way, but even if you don't, somebody else will. So when you're writing this statement, whether you do it with a team or not, think about writing for the eyes and how it's going to look on paper or your computer screen, but also more importantly, sometimes how it's going to sound and how people are going to digest it that way. Very important to think about that when you're giving testimony. And I'm reminded of last week, this brilliant Pope Francis. Many of us were glued to his many appearances, as I was. And it was very interesting because I'm a news junkie, and I was reading his prepared remarks, but also listening. And although he had a heavy accent and spoke slowly, it was just beautiful. And I pointed this out on my Twitter account, @Klein Crisis. And I was saying that it's very hard to achieve where you communicate so effectively in the written word, but also in your delivery, written for the ear. So keep that in mind for your testimony and for that matter, any of your communications. I also want to take this time to just quickly recommend a great book to help you with your presentation skills. And that is a book called The Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs. It's a wonderful book, and we all know Steve Jobs was the greatest business communicator probably in history. The book does a great job at taking apart how Steve Jobs prepared and why he was so successful in influencing opinion when he was on that stage, unveiling products and talking about his company. So check that book out as well. I also want to recommend real quickly my colleague Ruth Sherman, who can help you with your charisma. This is another thing that Ruth turned me on to, which is not everybody is a born natural speaker, but it can be learned. And you have to, as a leader, not just have the content tight in your mind and have all your facts at hand, but also be able to deliver it in a convincing way, what my colleague Ruth Sherman calls charisma. So check her out too, ruthsherman.com. But getting back to the business at hand, let's review what we've talked about so far. We've talked about assessing your situation, whether you're in crisis mode or not. We're talking about developing smart written testimony, written for the eyes and the ear. The other thing you need to do that's critically important after this is to develop talking points or key messages. Again, the meaning of this is the same. Talking points, key messages that you will use throughout the time you're in that hot seat to stay on message, to hold to your position, but also so that your company can broadcast on its social media channels those key messages that you want to get across, whether it's to deflect negative attention, to defend reputation, or to advance an issue, to advance the reasons why you want to build that project. All of this has to be done in sync with your testimony. So you're on that. You're going to testify. You have your written remarks. Those should be on your website. At the same time, and actually a few days before that testimony, you should begin a social media campaign where you're dribbling out your key messages, your talking points that you want to advance, because public opinion begins long before you are sitting before a government agency. So you want to start influencing hearts and minds long before you actually appear. And again, the days, the weeks, and maybe even months after you testify, you want to keep that campaign going. So no matter what happens during that testimony, even if you're come under attack and you're getting beat up by these politicians, you have to keep your composure and remember that it's not just that day of testimony that's going to influence public opinion. It's the public relations and media relations campaign that you did in advance of that testimony and at the other end, following your testimony. What I talk about in my business very often are the 3 key timelines at a crisis: before, during, and after. And whether you're in a crisis or not, or maybe you're just trying to advance an issue to get that project approved, for example, it doesn't matter. You still have to make sure that you think about these 3 key timelines before the issue is coming before that town board, the day of the town board meeting that has you on the agenda, and then following that that town board or local board meeting, keeping the conversation in your favor through social media and through media relations. Very important to do. Okay, so again, it doesn't matter what agency you're appearing before. You as a business leader have a responsibility to your stakeholders, to your critical audiences, to present well, to write sharp testimony, to create sharp and strong affirmative talking points that can be used to protect your reputation and to advance your issue with people who are going to make those decisions. Whether it's a government agency anywhere in the world, it doesn't matter. Your job is to influence public opinion and win hearts and minds. So let me know what you think of all this. Please use hashtag #TheCrisisShow. You can reach me at rich@richkleincrisis.com for any further information on anything I talked about. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you soon.